Senator Tom Cotton is a proud Army veteran. Good morning, Senator. Welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show. What say you about the game?
Good morning, Hugh. It's good to be on with you. I am an Army veteran. They're not a West Point veteran, so it's not quite as central in my life as it may be to some, but wish the cadets well. Wish the midshipmen well, of course, too, but I want the Army to win. And I guess congratulations are in order to you as well as I'm talking about college football. Your Buckeyes back into the playoffs by USC losing. It couldn't have been a better weekend for Hugh Hewitt.
It couldn't have been. In fact, Easter came before Christmas this year as the Buckeyes were resurrected. That's the opening line of my second column this week for the Post. Senator, let me ask you about something I asked Rick Scott about earlier. You and Dan Sullivan both told me flat out you're not running for president. Senator Scott wouldn't say no. I'm not going to ask you about Senator Scott, but I'm going to start my GOP News special edition today because 2022 finally, in fact, let's go there first. 2022 ends today with the Georgia runoff. How important is it that Herschel win?
Well, it's incredibly important, Hugh, for the people of Georgia, irrespective of who controls the Senate in January and in the future. For the next 6 years, the person who wins today is going to be Georgians' voice in the Senate. I think Georgians want a voice for fiscal sanity, stable prices, low taxes, tough on crime policies, a secure border, and strong national defense. And Herschel Walker will give it to them. Raphael Warnock won. So if you're listening anywhere across Georgia today and you haven't voted, please make sure to get out the polls and pull the lever for Herschel Walker. In terms of control of the Senate, it makes a real big difference. I mean, there's lots of procedural things I could go into, but I'll just put it this way. At 50-50, it only takes one Democrat to defect on bad laws or especially bad nominees, and there have been plenty of really radical nominees that we've stopped because this or that Democrat declined to go along with them. Sometimes it's happened in private and hasn't been reported publicly. But trying to get two Democrats to defect on the same nominee or the same legislative measure, that's a horse of a different color. So it matters first and foremost for the people of Georgia for the next 6 years, but it certainly matters in terms of the country and total control of the Senate in the hands of Chuck Schumer for the next 2 years.
Now, Senator Cotton, my next question goes to GOP News. It's a new feature I'm starting for the Universe today. I'm unclear. Do you listen to the podcast or do you listen to the Universe, Senator?
I listen to your podcast, Hugh.
Okay, so you missed most of the show. We got out, and you're gonna miss the GOP News, which is going to follow the live show every day, but only for Universe subscribers, because there's too much GOP news every day. I've got a list here: former President Trump, who's declared, and then not declared, and probably running. Greg Abbott, Chris Christie, Ted Cruz, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Larry Hogan, Asa Hutchinson, Kristi Noem, Mike Pence, Marco Rubio, Rick Scott, Tim Scott, Chris Sununu, Glenn Youngkin. And then I have not running, Tom Cotton and Doug Ducey. When you've got the not running, when the not running list is 2 and the maybe running list is like 20, I'm just curious, did I forget anyone when I ran down that list?
Hugh, it's hard to imagine that you forgot anyone, given how quickly you ran through a very long list of names, many of whom I consider friends, all of whom are accomplished leaders in their own right. I'm sure that plenty of those will run. Some probably will not. You know, Ann and I decided to close the chapter on 2024 because our boys are just not at a good age for this. 5 and 7, it's just a tough time to be on the road 6 or 7 days a week. We're not necessarily closing the book for all time and in the future. But right now, I'm going to continue my work in the United States Senate, which I'm very grateful to people of Arkansas let me do. And I wish all those people well, and I'm sure our voters will be able to pick a highly capable nominee. But I'm also sure that my boys can't find another dad for the next 2 years either.
And I respect that. And I can speak GOP. And that one, actually, most people can be trilingual and understand. You're saying, no, I'm not running. And Doug Ducey has said, no, I'm not running. So I speak GOP. But I had Senator Rick Scott on earlier today, and I asked him the same question. Well, I asked Dan Sullivan. He said, no, I'm not running. I asked Rick Scott, and he said, I'm running for senator in Florida. So does that rule out? He said, well, I'm running for senator. That's not a no, and therefore I speak GOP, and he's still on the margin there. Do you listen to it?
Again, I don't want to speak for any one person in particular. Everybody will take the time the next few months to make their own decisions. I'll just say that having made my own Sherman-esque statement, I would assume that if someone doesn't make a Sherman-esque statement, it means they're at least not quite to the position where Sherman was of refusing the nomination if given and not running if nominated, not serving if elected. So I assume anybody who doesn't say that, who doesn't simply say no, is at least kicking the tires a little bit. And like I said, I wish them all well. It's a big decision to make. And I hope they all take the time to reflect on it and make what's right for them, what's right for the country.
So, Senator, I love it when it's easier to talk to the people who've made Sherman-esque statements and get them in a room than it is the people who haven't. So I'm talking to someone who's made a Sherman-esque statement, and I want to talk to you about something that I'm writing about for the Post. I don't think that the RNC is thinking ahead well enough about how to get candidates onto platforms early to talk about the difference between Joe Biden, who I think is running for re-election, and the Republicans. First, do you think Joe Biden is running for re-election?
Hugh, I would assume he is, just because I assume that, people who get elected president want to keep being president, and they run for re-election, as almost every modern president has. I know that his chief of staff last night, he said he expects to make that decision sometime after the holidays, so I assume we'd know in the next, 4 or 5 weeks. But I would assume that he's running for re-election, yes.
And when I was on Special Report on Friday, and Brett suggests to me, hey, look, this new South Carolina primary must be good news for Kamala Harris. I said, it might be, but it's clear to me that that means Joe Biden is running because he didn't want to go up to New Hampshire and get Lyndon Johnson. He does not want to go to Iowa and get rejected again. He wants to go to South Carolina with Jim Clyburn, another old guy who's done well in South Carolina for a long time, and win again. Is that how you read the DNC shakeup of their primary calendar?
I can only imagine that the DNC trying to change the order of their elections is designed to benefit Joe Biden, who, of course, lost badly in both Iowa and New Hampshire. Now, I don't think it's necessarily a good thing for Kamala Harris because, remember, she ran such a poor campaign in 2019. She didn't even make it to the starting line in 2020, and that includes among the voters in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina. She simply had no appeal anywhere. But I should also say, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that any of these changes are going to happen the way Joe Biden proposed. You've already seen New Hampshire politicians, to include Democrats, saying they're not going to give up their first-in-the-nation status. Georgia leaders have suggested they're not going to have 2 separate primaries to accommodate Joe Biden's wishes. So I think there's still a lot of matters to be settled on the Democratic side. I, for one, think that it's not broke. We shouldn't try to fix it. And then Iowa and New Hampshire have done very good jobs being the first-in-the-nation caucus, a first-in-the-nation primary. And I would suspect our party is going to continue with that tradition.
They waited to make that announcement until after the New Hampshire Senate race was decided because they knew they were going to tick off everyone in the Granite State, where I'm heard across the entire state. And I do think the only way you can figure that out is that Joe Biden is afraid of New Hampshire voters and that he's going to run again and he wants a home game. And that's South Carolina. He wants a home game. It's not going to work for Georgia Bulldogs in Atlanta when the Buckeyes take it to him, but Joe Biden wants a home game. So the question becomes, Senator Cotton, when do these Republicans have to figure it out? When do you think they have to get in the game or not get in the game?
Oh, Hugh, everyone is going to make their own decisions. On their own timelines, if I recall, in 2016, I guess it was 2015, you had several of my colleagues in the Senate announcing in the spring, back to 1999, George Bush waited until his legislative session was over in the summer. So I would suspect you'd see a lot of different people making decisions between January and then when state legislative season ends and for governors in usually April and May. So I think we still have several more months of kind of the preseason, if you will, before our race is fully engaged.
All right, so we'll come back and talk about that another time. I want to talk about Iran and China. Yesterday I had Len Kordakovsky on. I originally scheduled him because Don Lemon at CNN was so rude to him after Donald Trump's infamous dinner that I just thought he needed a chance to say his piece. But then we got to talking about Iran, and Len knows a lot about Iran from his time with Mike Pompeo and Keith Kroc at State Department. Do you think that regime is wobbly? Because it seems that you're too young to remember 1989, I suspect. But all of a sudden, there wasn't an East Germany anymore. All of a sudden, they just threw open the wall, and it was over. Could that happen in Iran? Do you think it's happening in Iran?
Well, I actually am old enough to remember that. Not all the ins and outs in the months-long lead up to it, but, when something like the Berlin Wall, one of the terrible symbols of the Cold War and the Iron Curtain collapsed, even a 12-year-old boy can remember that. I will say that if you look throughout history, to include modern history of the collapse of communist governments in the 1980s throughout the Warsaw Pact, things that seem impossible for the longest time can very quickly turn into inevitable. And the durability of these protests in Iran, I think, has shocked the Ayatollahs. I would call on President Biden to take a more explicit, supportive message for them. I know that all the sophisticates in Washington always say that, we don't want to be viewed as instigating the protest or hurting them by suggesting they're under foreign influence, this is what they always say to justify their inaction. It's what Barack Obama said in 2009 when he refused to support the Green Revolution protesters because he was trying to suck up to the Ayatollahs to get a nuclear deal. It's what Joe Biden and Democrats are saying about protests in China as well. Whereas we know from the history of the Cold War that protesters like the Solidarity Movement in Poland were yearning for words from American presidents in support of their aspirations for freedom. And that's what we should be providing, in addition to walking away from the nuclear negotiations and taking every step we can to hobble Iran's campaign of terror throughout the world.
Now, Senator, I'm holding in my hand this book you might be familiar with, Only the Strong. I want someone from Team Cotton to take your new book, Only the Strong, around to every senator, because I read the holdup on the omnibus, the full year funding of the Department of Defense, as being Democrats wanting more money for non-defense domestic discretionary spending and not enough money for defense. And if they would read Only the Strong, they would know that's not acceptable. Am I right about what's going on?
Yeah, Hugh, it's actually a major theme of Only the Strong that the progressive left has not been serious about the defense of America for 100 years. They view the military as just another budgetary account that they can use to fulfill their domestic ambitions, and that's exactly what you see this week. We were ready to release the defense bill late last week, and then Democrats began insisting that they add on all kinds of extraneous non-defense measures, whether it's banking for marijuana distributors or a payoff to Joe Manchin to put his permitting reform bill on the defense bill, or to create a journalism cartel paying off the liberal media. These things are all totally irrelevant. And if the Democrats proceed, then I suspect Senate Republicans will filibuster the defense bill until they relent. And for that matter, House Republicans, whose votes are necessary to pass the defense bill, probably won't supply those votes until the Democrats back down. We shouldn't be using the annual defense bill, which supports our troops, as just another domestic plaything to try to fulfill the Democrats' non-defense ambitions.
Senator Cotton, we got 10 seconds. How much up spending over the Biden budget do you think we need and will support in this budget?
Well, the defense bill that's ready to be unveiled shows $45 billion more. I would like more than that. With the House, Republican House, I suspect we will get more than that next year, but the need is very urgent given the state of our military and the threats we face.
Senator Tom Cotton, thank you. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Clarity is much appreciated on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Senator Cotton, always clear. Thank you, Senator.